where you are right now. You are at the beginning of this year's Inclusive Managers Learning Series. We will have at least monthly webinars that will be absolutely free to you or anyone who wants to enroll and join. Please just send a link off and invite all your friends. Anyone who wants to can participate. We'd love to be able to share information and hopefully helpful resources with you. We also have, for the next 5 weeks, a concentrated schedule because we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to learn about us, to get samples of our work and of our voice. So over the next 5 weeks, we're offering webinars every week. The topics and the associated dates are listed on this slide, as are live links. We will send these links to you via email, but we want to make sure that you can mark your calendars. Each of these webinars is at 1 p.m. Eastern, and they will happen for the next 5 weeks. In addition, every first Thursday of the month, we will continue to offer our regularly scheduled Inclusive Managers Learning Series webinars. So please join us and share broadly. We would welcome people. All right, and now the moment you've been waiting for. This is our opportunity next to introduce Clarybel Peguero, who is one of the smartest people we know, who is also one of the consultants who we are able to work with. Clarybel brings deep experience working in higher education. She currently has a senior leadership role at Duke University in North Carolina. Her areas of expertise include organizational development and change management. She does a lot of work on coaching and has experience leading data-driven initiatives. A little bit more about her background and her credentials are listed here on this slide, but I think the thing that I can say about her that is not necessarily listed, but I think is probably the most delightful, is that Clarybel's has an infectious personality. Everywhere she goes, people immediately connect with her and resonate with not just her level of expertise, but also the really genuine, authentic, and connected way in which she shares her information with colleagues and clients. Clarybel, thank you so much for leading this session with us. And now I turn it over to you.
All right. Well, Dieta, thank you for such a kind and warm introduction. It is really a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I wanted to make sure that I let you guys know about the person behind the scenes. His name is Jerome, who will be helping us advance the slides, as well as unmuting folks so that we can have a rich conversation. As Dieta mentioned, I really try to be more engaging, which could be difficult on a virtual site, but it's very, very important that we do that. So today, I guess I'll just start off with the easiest question that I can ask you is, what are you interested in learning about power? Like, what brings you here today? So I can see some faces. You can't see mine because you don't want to see my background. It's really rainy in Durham, North Carolina, so I didn't want to show that side. But what is on your mind when it comes to power? What questions are you hoping to engage with today? And Jerome, we're able to see your questions on chat, or if you nope, I don't think I could hear anybody. So everybody must be on mute. I'm not sure. Not a problem at all. So we'll just continue. That's not a problem. So we are really excited that you are here. But a lot of people usually ask, oh, here's somebody. Makisha, how do you ensure, I think I could see, I think Jerome's gonna have to read the rest for me.
How do you
ensure everyone feels a level of power in their roles?
Wonderful question. So understanding, how do you feel power in your role, no matter what role you're in, as far as positional? Great question. I see one from Talia.
I would like to know how to empower staff to understand that there is power at every level.
Wonderful. Great question. So how do we empower folks to know that it's not positional power, that we all have it?
And Perry says, how do you identify moments to use your power?
Wonderful. When to exert power? Great question.
And then Sally asks, how do we help those who feel powerless?
Being the voice of the voiceless. Great question, Sally. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. So when we think about the word power, it often can be very polarizing because it has oftentimes a lot of negative connotations. So we want to make sure that we are all on the same page on how we would define power. So if we go ahead and click on next. So for the purposes of today's conversation, we are going to define power as the ability to influence the behavior of others or overcome resistance to achieve a desired objective. All right, so we're all very comfortable with that. And when we think about power, we often think about it from like a strength perspective. So we think about the person that can run 5 miles at a gym, the power that they have there, or the government, the power that they have to make us pay those taxes every year. But when we think about leadership, we want to make sure that we can really see power in the strength view and making sure that we understand where that aligns. So the work of French and Raven is really critical when we think about power, because what they were able to do was to conduct a study. I'm seeing a chat that you're not able to get the audio to work. Susan, I think we can see your chat. But when we think about French and Raven, in 1959, they conducted a study to really look at what was the power that leaders had and how were they using it to influence success in their role. And so what they did is they came up with the 5 bases of power. So I'm going to go ahead and review them so that we're all on the same page. So when we think about the 5 bases, I'm going to share what they are, but I'm also going to let you know what are some of the challenges if you look at power from that perspective, or if that's how you show up when it comes to power. So the first one is coercive power. So just like you might have guessed, it's that whole issue of coercion, meaning that you're forcing someone to do something against their will. And your main objective when you're doing that is really compliance. So some of the challenges that people that have this type of power is that it really does create an unhealthy work environment, and it increases a level of dissatisfaction. So sometimes our leaders that use this type of power often try to have a way of threatening people to get their work done, which really can demoralize the people that are working for them. So that's something that we're challenged when it comes to coercive power, is really looking at it as, do you want to force people to do something, or do you want them to want to do it? And how do we influence them instead of forcing? The second type of power is reward power. So this is an ability for individuals to delegate and to really give rewards when tasks are completed. So the main objective with this type of power is compensation. Some people struggle with this type of power because that means that every time something is done or achieved, that the person starts looking for a raise or a promotion or a compliment. And so you have to understand that while this might be a good way to exert your power, that it does lead to some challenges because of the expectations that it opens up. The next type of power is legitimate power. So this is the traditional, the questions that they asked about how do you deal with power when you're in different positions. This is a type of power that we're talking about if you serve as the president, the CEO, that you have a traditional power because of the role that you're in and not based on the type of individual that you are. So the main objective when it comes to this type of power is control by positional authority. Sometimes the concern that arises with this type is that it is given to a person just based on their role, not necessarily because of how they work and how well they work with others. So it's really a title-based power. All right, next we're going to talk about reverent power. When you think about reverent power, it's really relational. It's your ability to translate how you accept people for who they are and how you approve. And it's really in an environment where you maintain a high level of emotional intelligence and you're really watching for the cues of others. It's very positive and it's really connection driven. And I'll be honest, I tend to be someone with reverent power, But I will tell you the biggest challenge that I have seen is that sometimes it does build a false sense of connections with others. And so sometimes it might be misinterpreted as more of a friendship than actually a relationship at work. And so sometimes that's been a challenge that I have personally faced with that. And lastly, we'll talk about expert power. So this is a type of power that's given to someone because clearly they know they're an expert in this area, they have the skill sets, and so they're able to come into any organization and really fulfill that role and responsibility based on being an expert. And so what they do, their main objective is to always be the person that knows, that promotes that image of being the expert in the room, that no one can question their decision because they know that they know. And so sometimes it's hard. One of the challenges of working with someone that has that is that they often don't really see that other people have other things to contribute because they believe that they are the actual expert. So what I wanted to do was really kind of open it up a little bit. I've kind of shared where my expertise or how I portray power is in the reverent way. So I wanted to kind of open it up to hear, how do you think that you display power in your workplace? And what challenges do you see with that? All right, so I know Jerome has shared with everyone that you can unmute yourself or you can go ahead and type in the chat box. All right, I think I see Jean. Jean has asked that we go back so you can see them all. Yes. Thank you, Jean. Great suggestion. So when you think about the powers, the 5 forms of power, where do you see how you exert your power and what are some of the challenges or even the opportunities with how you exert your power? All right. So I see a comment from Susan. I think, Jerome, if you can help me read that out.
I believe Susan's question was talking about reverent power and building relationships and connections.
All right. So Susan, that's the way that you exert your power is by creating those connections. I'm curious to ask you, have you found what I found with the relationship building, that sometimes it could be misconstrued as friendship versus work relationships as you are exerting that connection piece?
There are a couple more, Clarybel.
Okay.
We have Talia who says legitimate, and this is more when I'm not being taken serious. It doesn't feel great to pull the position / title card. Sandy shares expert power when teaching a group of fosters some basic dog first aid. I volunteer with a rescue group. Talia says she prefers to work from reverent power to build relationships and consensus. Joanne shares, for me as an HR leader, I balance reverent power with expert power since I like building connections across the organization. Now the messages are popping in. Susan shares sometimes, but usually more of the go-to person to get an answer and weave through the organization. And then Leah talks about cohesive power doesn't resonate with her at all, but depending on the situation, she thinks she might exert a little bit of all types of power.
And that is a great point, is that, I love the person that said that sometimes you use your legitimate power when you feel that people are not listening. So you'll say, actually, as the director of this or the vice president here or the program coordinator responsible for this, this is what we need to get done. So know that each form of power, we all have a little inside of us all. It's just depending on when is the right time to use it and exert it, and trying to see the positive way to do that. And so that's when we really talk about how do we transform power into influence. And I really like to look at it as an evolution, because there are times, like we mentioned, that you just feel like I need to just go in there and say, based on this role, this is what I need you to do. And that's what we're doing. And sometimes you can say, hey, we have this project due, and if those that can get it done by this date, this is what I'm able to reward you with. And so I think it really does have its moments when you have to figure out when is the best time to exert it, and then how do we transform that into becoming a little more influential. Susan has a comment about compensation, or in her role.
I used to be in a compensation role and had reward power, though I didn't always think of it that way, but use reverent power to get people to understand what is important and when to demand a reward and when more of the table stakes.
Exactly. So really recognizing the time and place for that. So when we look at that this is great discussion, because like I said, is how do we evolve from using the power that we know we have inside of us and to using it more as an influential piece. And so I want to make sure that we recognize that there is a relationship between power and influence, and that for those of you that were able to do some of the pre-reading, that it really, knowing the difference can really make a difference within your organization, and it can make or break your organizational culture, right? So I'm going to ask Jerome to go ahead and bring us to slide 14, which talks about influential leaders. Beth Cool really, during an article that I was reading about, she talked about what really makes an influential leader stand out from the rest. That they really do know when is the right time to exert their different powers, but also understanding how do you influence others. And so one thing that she really talked about that I really enjoyed was she talked about how do you share success. So as leaders that are trying to motivate other people and really try to set a work culture that is transformational, that is safe, that is engaging, it's so important for us to share those stories of success that we've had when working with other people, working with different projects. And in the midst of sharing success, that's how you really serve as a mentor to other people, in sharing, like, this is something that has worked for me, and then this is something that hasn't worked for me. How do you draw out the greatness in other people? And that's something that I truly do value in leadership, is being able to see the potential in someone and saying, wow, if you did this, this would help you here. Or I noticed that you didn't speak up a lot in the meeting, but when we're in private, you have a lot of wonderful things to say. How can I help you in the next meeting do a better job? Or how can I help you with supervision, because I noticed that this is happening here? And so being able to really see the potential in someone and helping draw that out, that is something that a lot of influential leaders really try to encompass. And then how do you ensure that the employee feels safe? And now, you know, in our workplaces, it's just not safety as far as physical safety, but it's emotional safety. You know, we are dealing with people every day, and that is a big task, because you don't know what people are dealing with at home or in their life. And so being able to create that safety for our employees is so, so very, very important. And so what I wanted to do, and I love people in the chat, is really talk about what examples do you have of someone that has really been able to evolve their power and showing how to be more of an influential leader. And I think the chat is open and ready, so please feel free. Oh, perfect. I see. So an example of a time of a leader that really has exerted not just being a leader, but also their influencing style that has been very positive. So I see something from Peter.
Yes, Peter shares that a leader that has a high level of empathy, as an example.
That is so great, Peter. Thank you so much. On sharing some personal, I had a few years ago dealt with something pretty personal, and I realized that that really shaped me as a supervisor, because knowing that I had the power because of my legitimate power to walk into a meeting and say, not interested in meeting today, let's change the time, that other people don't have that ability to do that. So I really learned how to become a little more empathetic to other people and where they're at. So I see that Susan and Sally are sharing some good things.
Sandy has shared, my old boss wanted to start the day with a piece of good news every day.
Mm.
This was a busy retail store, and it helped, especially during the Christmas holiday rush. Susan shares, I worked with a leader who recognizes members who contribute to the success of his outcomes. Sally shares, a workshop facilitator who was mindful in her approach, caring and good at listening and providing feedback. Catherine shares, my manager is not afraid to be vulnerable and share mistakes and lessons learned. And Leah shared, a leader who treats me as a team member rather than an underling.
Mm-hmm. So those are all wonderful, wonderful examples of how you can become an influential leader. It's looking around those that you think are doing it really well, but sometimes seeing people not do it so well, right, actually helps guide you and shapes how you want to behave as a leader as well. And that's what I find. So I wanted to make sure that we really talk about what are the ways that, like I said, that we can evolve from power to actually becoming more influential and increase your influence. So I'm going to have Jerome hit the next slide and share a little bit about the 5 steps to increasing your influence. So one is understanding your influential style. For me, I recognize my sphere of influence very, very quickly. I can walk into a room and say, okay, this is my sphere of influence. This is where I can have the most effect, and this is where I can have the least effect. So how do I do that? Making sure that I recognize who I am. We talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and really knowing who you are, how self-aware you are of how you can come into a room. I have a big personality, making sure that I know when to use it, when not to use it. I've taken countless amount of assessment tools and tests to make sure that I recognize if I'm being blue or green or being someone that is being extroverted or introverted, like making sure that you understand what your influence style is. Being self-aware is so important. Knowing how you dominate, knowing when you're not dominating, when you're being assertive, when you're being aggressive, and really looking at different situations. That's so important to do that. When you take stock of your situation is really understanding is the environment and those around you is, are you sharing too much? Are you talking too much? Are you not talking enough? Do people really want to hear from you? How are you navigating different spaces? Who are the critical stakeholders? And it's so important when you're thinking about that. How do you identify your gaps? And this might be the hardest thing yet, because who we are is who we are, and sometimes we think that we can't grow anymore. But knowing that you're on this webinar is you're saying, no, I want to know how I could do this power and influence a lot better. And so figuring out how do you develop those skills that you're lacking. And so workshops like this help you bring to light, like, oh, I'm not that type of leader. I would like to see this more in my work. I want to make sure that people that work for me, that I supervise, feel that I am empathetic, that I am assertive, that I do know, that I have knowledge, that I do have a good communication skill, that I am connecting, that I recognize the work, that I try to give rewards when I can, all of those wonderful things. Some people decide that it's time to hire a coach to really help them with some of the gaps, and really understanding who are your role models when it comes to leadership and development and presentation style. Who are those people that you would like to emulate, and figure out what do they do that they do it so well. And then the big thing is really practicing. When you think about influential skills, it's not something that happens overnight, and there will be some mishaps because we are all human, but figuring out okay, is this a low stake opportunity for me to really role play and figure out how I can show my influence in this situation? And how do I build that capacity? How do I build that confidence? So then the next time I'm dealing with a difficult situation, that I'm able to have a different outcome and be a little more influential in that way. And so those are the ways that I have tried to really increase my influence. And so would love to really hear from you guys to hear, how have you done it in the past? Or what advice would you have for someone that's wanting to do that? And as Jerome mentioned, you can unmute yourself if you'd like, or you could go ahead and type in the chat box. And this was really my final challenge, is how will you commit to doing something different as you move on with the rest of your day to day, as you continue to work with other people, is figuring out how you will increase your influence. And I always love to hear from people to hear how they're going to do that. So Sally, I see that you're typing.
Sally shares, by modeling the behavior that I want to see in others.
That's wonderful. And so often we can see what other people are doing wrong. And I once heard from a wise person that that's sometimes because you have some of those things within yourself. So that's how you can notice it so quickly in others, but making sure that you can take that time to reflect and think about how you will model it different. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Christina shares, by engaging instead of withdrawing.
Mm. Christina, that is an excellent point. Is we often, when we don't feel that we have that power in a room, we often do disengage. And the beauty is, how do you get that power or that feeling that it's important to engage? So that's a great commitment, is to say, I'm going to stay in this. It's not comfortable for me. It may be out of my zone, but I'm going to try and do better and engage with the conversation, engage with the people. And sometimes one-on-one engagement might be the best way to do that than in a larger group, if you're still building that level of confidence with that.
Catherine shares, share your goals and interests with your managers so they know you're interested in developing your skills and increasing your value to the organization.
Absolutely. So professional development starts with you. Even though we would love to work in environments where everyone sees your talents and wants you to grow and develop in different ways, only you know when you are ready for next things, what opportunities are available. And so you have to make sure that you voice those with your manager. Sometimes people don't know your aspirations and where you want to head as a person. And so making sure that you're able to share those, be on the lookout to see what other people are going to, what other conferences, are they getting coaches, are they going to workshops? So figuring out what is out there, what's available, bringing that back to someone and saying, I would like for you to be committed in taking me here. Or I noticed that you always go to this meeting on Mondays. I would love to hear more about it. And I would love to attend. So really thinking about what is available to you in that space. All right. Well, I wanted to make sure that Dieta has an opportunity to share a little bit more about the manager's toolkit and do her outro. And if there's anything that you wanted to share, Dieta, when it comes to power and growing and evolution of that.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Clarybel. That was fantastic. I deeply appreciate you taking the time to prepare for this session with us and for being ever so engaging with our friends who are joining us virtually. I did have a couple of ideas, and this is, me just thinking about the topic of power. It is absolutely one of my favorite subjects. And I find it ever so interesting because it's really important for us to not just acknowledge that power exists, but also to acknowledge where and how we have power, how and when we exert influence, and also to understand that power exists in complex systems and that all of us are constantly navigating and or leading or shaping or influencing complex systems, whether it's a one-on-one relationship, managing or leading or participating as members of a team, or trying to drive change within an organization or a community. So I had a couple of things that just came to my mind that they're not prepared thoughts necessarily, but they're just things that I thought might be interesting to just kind of throw out there, at least some of the things that I find really interesting about power. So related to the topic of power, in addition to what you described, Clarybel, as the 5 forms of power, it's also known as the 5 bases of power, base or form, as in whether or not something is present and to what extent it's present, right? So those 5 forms of power that you described are examples of types of power that exist. There are, as you all know on this webinar, a lot of other ways in which power exists in the world, and that plays ourselves out in our systems, in our cultures, in our relationships. And I mean anthropological, sociological ways of thinking about culture, but also in our organizational culture, right? And there are a lot of different ways that power exists. And the kind that we talked about, or that you talked about, Clarybel, are more kind of the kind that we often think about in the context of an organization, under kind of a traditional management model. Traditional as in, you know, over the last 100 years, the way that we've talked about management in the United States, and oh, by the way, is changing significantly. So associated with those 5 forms of power are potential influence strategies that are not the base of power itself, but instead the specific behaviors that one chooses to use in order to extend our influence, in order to get something accomplished. And so in addition to the bases of power, we all have influencing strategies, which is what you so beautifully articulated, Clarybel, that are really important for us to think about. And that's where some of the assessments that you alluded to, Clarybel, are so useful to think about. Like, what are some of my own strengths? What is my own authentic voice? What is my context? What is my relationship to power in this organization or in this specific role? And then thinking about not just what bases of power or forms of power do I have access to, but what would be the appropriate influencing strategies for me to exert in this specific situation where I have a very particular agenda that I'm trying to forward. And when I say agenda that I'm trying to forward, I don't mean something that's nefarious or self-serving necessarily, but something that we're trying to accomplish. Typically in the service of advancing an organizational strategy, but oftentimes also just in the service of having more healthy, robust, and wellness-based working relationships. In the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, which you'll see a description of, or at least a promotion for here on the slides right now, we go into more depth, talking about not just the basis of power or some of the bases of power, but also influencing strategies, very specific description of different influencing strategies, and also opportunity for individuals to think about which influencing strategies would be most appropriate for you to use under what circumstances. And to know that every effective leader, manager, individual, practitioner, or contributor is going to need to be able to draw upon a whole array of influencing strategies at any point in our career, and that our work, our ongoing development and investment is constantly trying to develop additional strength with additional strategies that we know to be helpful. The other thing about power, and one of the other things that's changed significantly as we shift, culturally speaking, is that we understand that power is more effective when it's shared, when we create space for a variety of different voices, when we leverage different kinds of power, and we help people be influential in a variety of different contexts where they may not have been in the past, or they may not currently be as influential as they'd like to be or they could be. And so really thinking about how it is that you can actively share power is a huge opportunity. And some of you already talked about that. The other thing that's tricky is that, you know, a lot of us think about power and have experienced power as going one direction, right? That power kind of flows in a downward motion, that there are people at the top, and that as you kind of have less and less status, or in a specific hierarchy, you have less power. And again, this is where culture is changing. Societal culture and organizational culture is changing, so that we are much more kind of moving to understanding how it is that people who have traditionally, or in this, kind of current systems, had more power, understand that our jobs, your job, is to figure out how to share power, how to make sure that people around you are not just empowered in word, but also have the tools and the skills and the ongoing support that will help them to be able to truly be in a shared power space, which is a very significant paradigm shift. Empowerment is one of people's favorite influencing strategies. It's the one that people typically describe themselves as using most often. And it is also the most misinterpreted and ill-defined of all of the influencing strategies. Empowerment is wonderful in theory, but in practice, empowerment is really about the process. Empowerment is about how it is that we engage people early on in processes, and then make sure that that engagement allows for ongoing input of different ideas and voices that will shape not just the outcome or the output, but also the process itself, which may mean that we may have to reconceptualize what our success criteria are, or give up power, or give up decision making in places where you have, or someone else has traditionally had the final say. And so really thinking about, how some of the cultural shifts that are happening in the world, in the United States, in North America, in our organizations, is having an impact on our leadership philosophies and our managerial philosophies is pretty powerful. So I'm so happy that we could be talking about this topic now, because it's just kind of a sharp reminder of how important it is for all of us, regardless of how much power we think we have, or the influencing strategies that we have typically used, that we pause and examine, right? Let me really think about, where do I have power? Where do I need to acknowledge that that power exists as part of my role, part of my my own personal strengths as far as my character or my skill sets? And then figuring out how do we leverage those in the service of advancing values that are shared and that are really inclusive. And then also, how do we continue to create space for other people to participate in this new powerful space that we all need to be in together? So really excited that we're talking about this. And for those of you who want to continue to delve into the issue, the topic, the tools, techniques associated with power dynamics and influencing strategies, and do more kind of self-assessment, and also dig deeper into thinking about, in your own context, what are some of the techniques that you might use that are situationally sensitive and that will allow you to expand your own portfolio of influencing strategies. I encourage you to take a look at the Inclusive Managers Toolkit as one opportunity for doing that. Just as a description of the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, it is a 10-week online program that is also filled with a lot of content that is broken into segments on individual effectiveness, on working with teams, and then having or impact organization-wide over the course of a 10-week experience. There are videos associated with every single one of the modules, and modules only are released on a weekly basis, so you're not bombarded with or just trying to swim through a lot of information. And then there are also opportunities every single week for live coaching conversations with our expert faculty members and also with myself. And we also have webinars that have to happen quite often to help sure that you are synthesizing and processing and have access to another set of kind of supporters to help you figure out how to apply the content in your context. So very much encourage you to think about participating with us. The Inclusive Managers Toolkit enrollment period is now for spring 2020, and we go live February 17th. So we would absolutely love for you to join us. Next slide, would you, Jerome? And so if you're interested in the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, you can take a look at the schedule which is listed here. And also there's a live link, which we also have on our website, and that will, the link will also be available in our webinar series updates. But this is the schedule that just gives you a sense of what some of the content is. I have to say that it's jam-packed. This is kind of soup to nuts as far as the things that are really important as an individual manager at supervisory level, at a high level or a mid-manager level, or as an executive. And we've had people in all of those categories participate and find it meaningful. But the other thing that's really meaningful is not just the content, but the opportunity to connect with other colleagues who are participating live at the same time, because you'll be able to share information about best practices in a variety of different environments and strategize with colleagues. And also sometimes just know that you're not the only one who's having a specific experience, and make some important networks, professionally speaking. There are 2 transition weeks so that you can kind of catch up in between so that you're not going to be overwhelmed. And then you also have lifetime membership so that even if you skip over a couple of things or miss a webinar here or there, you can have access after the point of the 10-week period, no problem, and forever you will have access. So absolutely available to you. And the question is, would the IMT be appropriate for those who are not in a managerial role? Absolutely. And so everything that we design here is appropriate. And we do this because we've been doing management work with around management training and leadership development for so many years, that we know that a lot of people who may not have kind of a titular leadership role or a formal managerial role also have tremendous expectation of either coordinating or leading or managing, even if there's not a formal role, a formal title. And that we are also clear that people have a lot of responsibility beyond what their current portfolio is, and also that people want to start shaping and investing in their future and laying a solid foundation for the future. So yes, everyone is welcome and would find this to be meaningful, and it kind of stair steps so that you really start off with doing some self-analysis and then are able to move through a progression that allows for you to kind of start off at a specific individual level, scope out, and then come back in again to really reflecting on your own personal next steps. The other thing that I would say is really a point worth making here about your continued development, and not just for the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, but also even reflective of our webinar series, is that we commingle content and learning that's related to leadership, effectiveness, managerial proficiency, and inclusion, equity, diversity, very intentionally. We do not think that those 3 topics should be standalone topics. And we also understand that all managers and all leaders are expected to more and more be proficient in understanding what equity, diversity, and inclusion is, how to do it, how does it show up, how do we cultivate environments where people are feeling fully included and engaged, and that we need strategies because the expectations are continuing to evolve and the expectations are pretty sophisticated. So we make sure that we make these topics related to equity, diversity, and inclusion not standalone, but part of the learning experience for people who participate in our professional development offerings. With that said, I want to invite you to participate in the upcoming webinars. If you'd like to continue to reflect, to think about your own professional development goals, to get a sense of our style. The next 5 webinars in the webinar series that are going to be happening every week are going to come from me. I'll be facilitating all of those. And so I look forward to comments, questions. Come on back every single week, invite your friends. And again, very much thank you for just this continued level of engagement and commitment that is inspiring for all of us. And also, if you have comments or questions or feedback about additional topics that you'd like for us to cover in our Inclusive Managers Learning Series, send it to us. Send us in the chat window or post us a message so that we can incorporate that into our development cycle. We would love to be responsive, and that is actually the #1 source of how it is that we identify the topics that we'll focus on, is what people tell us they want and need. The webinar series content, the slides from today, including the recording, will be on our YouTube channel within just 2 days. And so we would absolutely love for you to visit us there if you want to go back and share these slides or this webinar with any of your colleagues or any of our previous webinars, or subscribe to the YouTube channel to make sure that you don't miss any of the upcoming webinars. Sally, I take your topic suggestion and will happily incorporate that. And by the way, we have some really good topics, webinar topics that start to address some of that question that you've outlined there. So thank you so much for that. And with that said, I want to wish you all a really wonderful Tuesday. Happy rest of your week. Thank you for kicking off 2020 with us, and we look forward to spending a lot more time with you in the future. All right, my friends, take care. Register for the IMT if you're up for spending a little bit more time together. Thank you.